All right, look at this absolute unit. I found a massive roller bearing race. It's industrial waste, probably 52-100 steel, which means it's hard, heavy, and absolutely miserable to work with. Let's see if we can turn this donut into something dangerous. And if you want to see how far this chaos goes, hit that follow. Step 1. We have to cut this thing open. I'm using the angle grinder with a cutting disc. You have to be careful here because these rings are under tension. When you cut through the last bit, it can snap. I'm taking out a section big enough for a large chopper. Now that I have my piece, I need a handle. Not the final handle, just something to hold on to so I don't crush my fingers. I'm welding a piece of scrap rebar to the end. This is a safety handle for the power hammer work. Don't trust tongs with this much weight. Into the gas forge. We need high heat, bright orange to yellow, around 1100 degrees Celsius. Bearing steel is stubborn. You cannot forge this cold, or it will crack immediately. We have to heat it thoroughly to relax the steel before we start unbending it. Here comes the noise. I'm using the power hammer to flatten the curve. I'm gently striking it to straighten it out into a flat bar. I'm not trying to shape the blade yet, just turning the arc into a straight line. Keep it flat against the dies. Now that it's straight, I'm using the edge of the dies to draw it out. I'm aggressively moving material now, stretching the bar longer and thinning it down. It's starting to look less like a bearing and more like a blade blank. Watch the heat. If it gets dull red, stop hitting it. It's long enough now. I'm using the angle grinder to cut off that rebar handle. Thanks for your service, buddy, and cleaning up the ragged ends. I'm also checking the profile. It's rough, but the mass is there. I'm clamping it down to grind the profile smooth before we go back to the fire. I want to clean up the sides and establish the general shape of the clip point. It's easier to grind the gross adjustments now than to hammer them in later. Back to the anvil. I'm hand forging the tip and refining the edge bevels. I'm also hammering in a distal taper, meaning the spine gets thinner towards the tip. This makes the knife lighter and faster. The power hammer does the heavy lifting. The hand hammer does the smart work. It needs to be perfectly straight. I'm sighting down the spine and tapping out any warps. Once the forging is done, I let it normalize to relieve stress. Now I'm back on the grinder, cleaning up the forge scale and refining the bevels. I'm using a flap disc to smooth out the surface. I'm also defining the ricasso area. That's the flat part before the handle. I need a clean transition line for the guard later. It's taking a lot of grinding because this steel is tough. I'm cutting in a choil or sharpening notch with the edge of the grinding disc. This separates the sharp edge from the handle area. It makes sharpening easier later, so you don't hit the guard with your stone. I'm doing some more surface grinding on the flats. I want this perfectly flat before I do anything else. I'm checking the thickness consistency. It looks like I'm cleaning up the spine area specifically, maybe preparing it for some detail work, or just getting it square. Moving over to the large belt grinder, I'm refining the primary bevels, slowly walking the blade across the platen to keep that grind line sharp and even. This is the part that decides whether the knife looks clean or like it survived a bar fight. The sparks are flying like crazy, classic high-carbon steel behavior, which means the edge is going to be wicked once it's all dialed in. Every pass smooths things out a bit more, and the blade finally starts to look like something you'd actually want to carry, or fear. I'm taking the finish up to a higher grit on the belt sander, sneaking closer to the final geometry with each pass. This stage is basically the calm before the chaos. I'm checking the tang, making sure nothing's loose or misaligned, because once we heat treat, every mistake becomes permanent. Then into the forge it goes. We need to hit critical temp, about 840 degrees C, where the steel stops being polite and starts being workable. When it hits that glowing cherry red, that's the signal. Time for the quench, and time to see if this thing survives becoming a real blade. The quench. Into the oil tank. Plenty of fire, which looks cool, but the real magic is the rapid cooling hardening the steel. After this, it's glass hard. Like, drop it wrong and it'll chip hard. I'm cleaning off the burnt oil scale with a wire wheel or grinder to see the surface, because this is the moment you find out whether you made a weapon or a very hot piece of modern art. Now I'm starting on the guard. I have a piece of brass plate. I'm drilling a row of holes in it. Then I use a mill, or a file if you're patient, to connect the holes into a slot that fits the tang of the knife. This part feels like tiny metal surgery, slow, stubborn, and unforgiving. If the fit's even slightly off, the whole guard sits crooked, so it's a lot of file, check, file again, question my choices, and keep going until it finally slides on clean. Test fitting the brass guard. It slides onto the tang. It needs to be a tight fit. No gaps allowed. Now for the handle material. I've got a cylinder of dense hardwood. I'm clamping it vertically and drilling out the center on the drill press to accept the hidden tang of the knife. Precision is key here so the blade sits straight. I'm fitting the wood onto the tang. It fits snugly against the brass guard. Now I take the handle block to the belt sander to shape it. An oval shape allows you to feel the edge alignment without looking, which is crucial for a chopper. Now for some custom detail work on the handle. I'm using a small file to cut a series of horizontal grooves all the way down the handle. I'm measuring them to keep them perfectly even. This isn't just for decoration. These grooves will hold a wire inlay that adds grip and a premium look. Take your time here. If the groove is sloppy, the wire won't sit right. For the inlay, I'm taking two types of wire, one copper and one steel, and twisting them together in a drill to make a tight cable pattern. Then I wrap this twisted wire into the grooves I carved in the wood. I pull it tight as I go and use CA glue, super glue, to lock the wire in place instantly. The glue soaks into the wood and stabilizes the wire. Back to the sander. I grind the surface of the handle flush. This sands down the top of the twisted wire and the wood together, creating a seamless surface where the wire acts as a metallic stripe. It's smooth to the touch but visually textured. It's a great way to add complexity to a handle without needing expensive machinery. Now I'm fabricating the pommel, the metal cap for the back of the handle. I'm using brass again to match the guard. I drill it, fit it to the threaded end of the tang, and then shape it on the grinder to match the flow of the wooden handle. I want the transition from wood to brass to be completely undetectable to the touch. I'm polishing the brass guard and pommel on the buffing wheel to get a mirror shine. However, bright gold looks a bit cheap on a rugged knife like this. So I'm applying a cold bluing solution to the brass. This chemically oxidizes the surface, darkening it to an aged antique bronze look. It gives the knife a bit of history before it's even used. If you want to see how this thing turns out in the end, hit that follow. Final assembly. I mix up the two-part industrial epoxy glue. I apply it liberally to the tang and fill the handle cavity. I slide on the guard, the wood, and the pommel. Then I screw on the pommel nut to clamp it all together tight. The mechanical nut holds it together while the epoxy creates a waterproof, permanent chemical bond. While that cures, I'm doing the final finish on the blade. Hand sanding to remove any machine marks is tedious, but necessary for a high-end look. I want a clean satin finish. Then, I treat the wooden handle with oil. Watch how the oil makes that dark grain and the copper wire inlay pop. It transforms from dull wood to a piece of art. Sharpening time. I'm establishing the final edge on the belt grinder with a fine belt. I'm careful not to overheat the edge and ruin the temper. Then I move to the leather strop to polish the edge and remove the burr. It needs to be razor sharp, capable of shaving hair effortlessly. The knife is technically done, and it looks incredible. The balance is great, the handle is grippy, but a blade this big and sharp is dangerous to just leave lying around on the bench. It needs a home, so we aren't finished yet. We need to build a custom wooden scabbard to match the quality of the blade. Starting the scabbard build, I have 2 planks of matching wood. I trace the exact shape of the finished blade onto them. I need to carve out the inside so the blade sits flush. I'm using a drill and chisel, or a rotary tool, to hollow out the cavity on both pieces of wood. It needs to be deep enough for the blade, but not so deep it rattles. I check the fit constantly. Slide the blade in, check for friction points, carve a little more. The blade should slide in smoothly and hold by friction at the guard. Once the cavity is perfect, I glue the 2 wood halves together, sandwiching the empty space in the middle. I clamp it tight and let the wood glue dry completely. Now I have a blocky, ugly wooden sheath. I take it to the belt grinder and shape the outside. I'm following the curve of the blade, removing all the excess wood to make it slim and elegant. I round the edges so it's comfortable to carry in the hand or on a belt. It's starting to look like a proper scabbard now. I want to add metal fittings to the scabbard to match the knife. I'm cutting a strip of brass sheet. I bend it around the mouth of the scabbard to create a throat piece. I heat it up, anneal it, to make the brass soft and pliable so it conforms to the oval shape of the wood without springing back. This reinforces the opening so the wood doesn't split. I solder the brass strip into a solid ring. I file the solder joint clean and fit it onto the wood. I'm doing the same for the tip, making a brass chap or cap to protect the bottom of the scabbard from impact. This involves some precise bending, soldering, and filing to get a seamless fit. It adds a lot of durability and style. I dry fit the brass pieces onto the wood. They fit perfectly. Now I take them off to finish the wood. I sand the wood scabbard smooth to 400 grit and apply the same dark stain and oil that I used on the knife handle. This ensures the knife and scabbard look like a matched set. The wood grain is really absorbing that finish beautifully. I glue the brass fittings onto the scabbard with epoxy to keep them secure. I also polish the brass and apply the bluing solution to match the antique finish on the knife guard. The contrast between the dark wood and the darkened, aged brass looks really classy and rugged. It's almost too nice to use. Almost. The set is finally complete. The knife fits into the scabbard with a satisfying, smooth action. It looks like a traditional weapon now, something you'd find in a fantasy movie or a historical collection. The handle ergonomics are great, and the balance is forward-heavy, which is exactly what you want for a chopping tool. Now, the moment of truth. Testing. I've got a water bottle set up to test the geometry and speed. One swing, clean cut. The geometry is thin enough to slice, which is impressive for a thick blade. It moves fast for such a heavy piece of steel. Now for the abuse, chopping into dry hardwood. This puts massive stress on the edge. It bites deep and throws big chips. I'm checking the edge. No rolls, no dents. The heat treat on that bearing steel was spot on. This was a long build, turning a rusty circle into a full custom sword machete with a scabbard. If you enjoyed the process and the result, please smash that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what I should forge next. Thanks for watching.